Hello, my name is Petra Jääskeläinen, and I'm presenting the paper What's the Look of Negative Gender and Max Ethnicity in AI-Generated Images? Critical Visual Analysis of the Intersectional Politics of Portrayal that we wrote together with Cecilia Åsberg. To introduce this paper, we focus on intersecting design political and visual processes of gendering and racializing in online AI image generators, in particular Artbreeder and Midjourney. These AI image generators draw on cultural and historical imaging conventions of sorting and ordering the world and people in it. These tools' powerful visual rhetorics can potentially aggravate existing discrimination if not critically reflected upon. We argue that these design-facilitated representations position the user into a cultural imagery of representations with political implications. With an intersectional perspective for feminist visual analysis, we critique and uncover how gender and ethnicity are represented and built into the systems, both in terms of visual culture and in designed interactions. While visual culture has been central to human societies since their early beginning, recent years have seen a sharp rise in very specific form and medium of producing visual culture, AI. When the creation of aesthetics and visual culture is automated with generative AI, there emerges a need for critical visual cultural inquiries on the imagery produced by AI. Historically, such analysis has been conducted in fields such as visual design, art history, gender studies, the feminist STS, and we argue that we need to draw from these disciplines to develop methods for critical analysis of aesthetics and visual culture of generative AI. We argue that designers of these tools have the responsibility to think not only about the biases built into the models, but to acknowledge their design political positionality in contributing to AI-mediated visual culture. And these efforts should be particularly focused on uncovering how the imagery construct privilege and discrimination of certain people from the perspective of design justice in regards to social categories. And intersectional perspectives are often at the core of exploring such questions. So in regards to the methodology, we are looking at two cases, Artbreeder and Midjourney. And we took samples of 20 in each of the parameters, gender, ethnicity with different prompts. And we also took a larger sample of 100 images to see what kind of general patterns we can see in those. So we extracted these samples and then we performed a visual cultural analysis for them. And in our case, the qualitative analysis was done iteratively by both of the two authors, reflecting back on the literature of media culture and feminist theories that we are discussing in the background section. To say a few words about this type of analysis, it's highly reliant on the subject expertise of the person performing the analysis, and that also highlights the importance of reflecting on the positionality. But that also challenges how we could formalize such methods of analysis. So there are three different themes that are emerging as our results, which I will now discuss in further depth. The first insight from our papers is regarding problematizing racialized and gendered archetypes and antitypes as an approach for constructing visual polarization and hierarchy. So what we could see in the system was that there are practices of arranging people in categories in relation to each other based on their visual features such as skin color, eye color, hair length, and facial shape to construct social arrangement and hierarchy. So these types of categorizations or arrangements create what we propose to refer to as norm-producing visuals of archetypes and antitypes. In these archetypes, the maximum core representation of a gender or ethnicity label or group is defined, and in the antitypes, the opposite of that is defined. And this establishes both visual norms and polar opposites of those norms, defining simultaneously both. For example, a Caucasian person is ought to look like and also what it's not supposed to look like, or what is the polar opposite of that. We propose these two terms as concrete ways of discussing the polarized representations, and we draw from media theories in which the term archetype has been used before to refer to archetypical characters in movies. In the first figure on this slide, we showcase both the gender and ethnicity-based archetypes and antitypes, the maximum and minimum representations. While both of these systems that we examine produce these gender and racialized representations, Artbreeder gives a good case example because it also has an interface element that concretely visually supports such categorizations. So in the second image here, you can see the slider designed for determining the minimum and maximum rates. Using the slider, the user is able to control the parameters to produce max plus 100 or minimum minus 100 representations of a certain racialization and gender representation. So we present the archetypes that we produced by basically ramping the values to the maximum in each category and to minimum in each category, which we did using those 20 seed images. And when we repeat the process with several images, we can see the repeating patterns and the common features to emerge. So when we look at the archetypes and antitypes, we start to see also some patterns in polarizations between them. So for example, the features of the white archetype are most often applied as the polar opposite of what the system categorizes as Asian, Hispanic, Indian, or Black. So thus we can see the social categories being juxtaposed in relation to each other and in contrast to each other. So therefore the system is producing arbitrary polarizations between certain representations of people based on their visual features. It feels absurd to think that we could arrange humans in such relation to each other based on just facial features, but yet that follows historical imaging convention patterns that we are discussing in this paper. There is a strong history of doing such type of sorting in our science making and imaging conventions. And these are, of course, problematic for several reasons. So, for instance, they're constructing a visual norm of a race and gender that is very narrowly defined and highlighting the differences and constructing a hierarchy between different representations. So the second theme relates to binary gender norms and aesthetic judgments of beauty with these gender norms. So when we looked into the gendering processes in ArtBreeder, we noticed that there's automatic gender assigning by the system in connection to racialized archetype, and that system is constructing heteronormative portrayals of gender in which the feminine portrayals are often sexualized or connected with the concept of beauty. Thus, the main concerns in regards to gender are enforcing heteronormative gender norms and assigning gender to racialization automatically and arbitrarily, which was happening also in both systems, the prompt-based Midjourney and ArtBreeder. For example, the Max Asian is often feminized, whereas the Max White and Max Middle Eastern are more often masculinized. Furthermore, we can see that most often the commonly racialized social groups such as Indian, Asian, Latino, Hispanic, and Black seem to have a feminine facial representation, including makeup or similar features that the feminine parameter is producing. So these insights seem to align with feminist critiques of the universal man representation. Then the third theme that we are discussing is constructing norms of social hierarchy for the gender and racialized representations. So we could see here, for example, that there are social norms involved in how these different representations of people are juxtaposed. For example, the first figure here is presenting what prompt of a beautiful family would produce, and we tried different ways of prompting it. Basically, the outcome is that producing certain type of nuclear representation with mostly two parents and two children here, and they have a very traditional binary gender aesthetics and how they are juxtaposed in the image. So then when we were looking at these images, we could see visual relation to, for example, some propaganda posters, which are also displaying a nuclear family of Caucasian people with two children, two adults. Basically, the problem here lies in how these family relations and social relations are represented and what kind of normative aspects those representations have when this imagery becomes part of the visual culture, and these are used increasingly in the production of visual materials. Then the last image here is the example of when we produce large amount of images and then we look at the representation on that larger sample. So we can here see basically the diversity of what the completely random generation produces. To discuss a little bit and conclude, there's a long history of racialized and gendered categorization and sorting, which is also visible in the modern day generative AI technologies, which we have started to unpack in this exploratory work. The problem here lies in how certain people are categorizing others, how basically the coded gaze becomes embedded into the systems, and what kind of visual norms are different kinds of representations producing. So in this paper, we have focused explicitly on gender and ethnicity. And one of the key points that we wanted to make in this paper is that we should frame these AI image generators as design artifacts that are coming from certain visual cultural contexts, and they are feeding into a certain visual politics of portrayals as well. So they are contextually embedded, and we should have further careful reflection on how we should design these systems. Also the kind of reflection that is sensitive towards the power relations and how those are enacted through the visual culture. And also to acknowledge our own design political positionality in making decisions in the design process of what kind of visual culture these systems are going to produce. So we think that the HCI community is in a central role in developing knowledge and methods for addressing these challenges.